John, good morning. How's it going, sir?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Thanks for asking. Appreciate it. Always great to talk to you. But I gotta say, it is even better to talk to you on the week after my fantasy football team has just absolutely dominated yours. I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, thanks for the lesson. I got a fantasy football lesson, a spanking this last weekend, so I appreciate it. I'll try not to hold it against you during this conversation. So,
well, hey, you're gonna give me and all of our listeners the real lesson here, the more important one. So I'm really excited to have the conversation today about about what we do here and specifically your role and how you help customers. But before we jump into that, John, as you probably know by now, I always like to ask people to kick it off. What was your first ever job, and what'd you maybe learn from that you carry with you today?
Well, it's an interesting question. My family owned a small business, so every kid in a family that owns a small business, their first job is working in that family business, but that doesn't pay. You don't get paid when you work in a family business usually.
Yeah.
So my first kind of paying job, the first time I had to go out and get, apply for something and get hired, I worked in a restaurant. I started in the dish room, and it was a buffet restaurant, so I was on a line that kind of cleaned plates, which is the bottom of the barrel. The dish room is the bottom of the barrel, and I was in the bottom of the barrel. And so it's an interesting place to start. And I guess what I learned from it is I learned how to show up, be on time, do a good job, to do what you're asked to do, and then that those are the seems like the bare minimum. But from just doing that, I got promoted to working in a kitchen, which was really which was where I learned a lot. And you learn how to work on a team. I learned some really good life skills there. I learned how to cook a steak. I learned how to season food. I learned I could do all sorts of little knife tricks. I can work with a knife, so you learned all those kind of skills too. But mostly you just learn, how to show up every day, how to be on time, how to have a good attitude. And those are all like really important skills to learn, how to work on a team as you move forward in your career. So that's really what I learned. And I took a lot of those lessons that I learned there, and I try to apply them every single day. So
that's incredible. I love that. I in food service myself in terms of first jobs, and I agree with your sentiment there on everything. And I think that I've always been an advocate or had this philosophy that, look, if you're going to work through high school or work through college, it's almost like, I don't know, like mandatory military service. You should go work in a restaurant, because if you do that, you're just going to gain, you're going to see what the real world's like. And also, if you can work in a kitchen or in a dish room, or I feel like if you can work with, chefs, let's say that, or cooks, you can take anything. You get really thick skin, I feel like.
Well, let me tell you, it wasn't fine dining. And to give you an idea what kind of restaurant it was a restaurant where a 17-year-old was like cooking steak. So this was not fine dining. But, I'm fortunate that the guy that ran that kitchen saw that I showed up every day and that I didn't complain. And I just kind of did my job. And then one day somebody didn't show up, and he asked me to come over and if I was interested in helping him out in the kitchen. And that was like a tryout. I got a tryout, and he showed me how to cut an onion. And then he gave me this gigantic bag of onions and said, cut all these up. And so I did. And I realized, hey, you know what? I can get out of this old miserable job, and this probably is a miserable job too, but I'll get into this new miserable job. And from there I kind of progressed through the kitchen, and it was a lot of fun. And their kitchens are crazy environments, and you learn how to work in that craziness. And anyway, I had a blast. It was I did it for 2-3 years, and it really had a lot of fun with it.
And worked your way up to less and less and less and less miserable jobs. Hopefully your job now isn't miserable.
No, I don't know anything else. It's I always tell everybody, man, if they made contact centers illegal tomorrow, I couldn't make a living, right? I wouldn't know how to do it. I've been doing it for 31 years, which is a long time. But it's really, from the first time I saw it, it just captivated me. This idea that, either people were calling you or interacting with you, or you were interacting with them. No one expected. There was nothing really planned or anything like that. It just happened. And all these great things came from it. It just, from the first time I saw it, it just blew me away. And I still, every time I interact with a client, I learn something new about the way they interact with their customers or with their prospects or whoever. It just keeps me interested. I always tell everybody I'm a consultant, so it's my job to sell knowledge, to basically work with our clients to help them solve their problems. But I learn as much in these engagements as I teach, which to me makes it really fun. And which is that's why I keep coming back and doing it every day. So
that's great, and it's definitely an innovative and constantly evolving. I feel like every time you blink, something new there's a new trend, or new technology or new something.
Right. I would tell you that, that while that is definitely true, I started my first job as an agent on an outbound program for AT&T, and we were making calls using index cards and label sheets, right?
Yeah.
And that it was a crazy process, but it's effectively what they're doing today. What they automated is what we were doing back then. So the automation makes it better and the technology makes it better, and it opens up new possibilities. But at the end of the day, I worked for the first guy I worked for. He said, "Hey, John, don't ever forget, this is just people talking to people." And I think that's like really true. And that's what I keep reminding everybody. We can make it complex, but at the end of the day, it's just people talking to people, right? And then how do you do that effectively? And the technology, which, in theory complicates it, really just enables that. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. We lose sight of the fact that technology in and of itself doesn't do anything other than just connecting us together into these interactions, whether it be digitally through chat or through SMS or through voice, the old fashioned way. That's all it really does. And it, and then all the other stuff around it just enables it at the end of the day. And that's really the way I try and focus on it is that way. So.
Yeah, that's a really great viewpoint and vantage point. I think it's really easy to make this extremely complex and get overwhelmed or have it appear daunting. But you're right; it is just people connecting with people at the end of the day, or people communicating with people. However you phrase that, that was great.
And we are working with clients right now. If you think about it, we went through this crazy time with the pandemic. It flipped everything on its head. Right. Mm-hmm. And so people had to make these rapid decisions. All the things that they thought were true many of them ended up not being true. I remember I was on a kind of a disaster recovery team at a prior job, and we were going through all the really bad things that can happen and trying to plan as part of that. And one of them was global pandemic. And I remember thinking, yeah, that's only slightly more likely than an EMT attack. What could go take out the world, right? And then it happened. Yeah. And so, it really, clients had to react, right? Their businesses were at risk. Customers were demanding more than ever. I mean, volumes exploded across the board. And so they were freaking out. And it's like, what do we do? So they basically prioritized rapid deployment of digital and cloud technologies to get their workforces remote so they could continue to interact with their customers to keep their businesses going. And I don't want to say they cut corners, they just prioritized. At the end of the day, they prioritize those things as opposed to maybe other things. And so now, okay, here we are 2 years later, wherever we are in the pandemic, I don't know, but we are where we are. We're coming back to this kind of new normal now. And so now what do you do now? How do you rationalize kind of today's business priorities with the decisions you made, 2 years ago? And I think that's what we're seeing clients come back to and look, it's like, okay, great, I got all this stuff. It's cool, but what am I going to do with it now? How do I meet my customer service, my customer experience objectives? I got agents now that have labor deficiencies and labor problems. How do I solve those things? And that's the kind of stuff we're working on right now is that, that kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, it's like, how do I just get more out of what I have, and what more should I be doing to achieve my business objectives, right? At the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you're right. It did go from, oh crap, we got to get everybody home like ASAP. We got to, figure out whatever we got to do this. And now you've got contact centers that have maybe all this stuff, or maybe don't have all this stuff, but either way, they're in a situation. And now the things that put them in that situation maybe don't exist as much anymore. And so it's just like, how do we sort of fine tune this? We were forced into some decisions, frankly. And now, maybe we can optimize that a little bit. I'm curious if you're seeing any really common themes or trends from people that are sort of in that predicament in contact centers today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think they're coming around to realizing that, hey, I've got all these things I can do. I mean, right now, labor is a huge issue, right? So
Hmm.
demand, again, has remained high. So clients expect what they expect. Back when I first started in the contact center industry, even 10 years ago, clients were focused on what I would call kind of selfish measures. So if I ran contact center operations at a kind of a large, global healthcare company, and we were more concerned about what was important to drive our business than necessarily thinking about what was important for our patients or for our the constituencies that we served. That wasn't maybe top of mind. Maybe it was number 2 on the list, but it was like,
Yeah.
okay, how do I deflect? How do I drive down the cost of labor? How do I do all those things, because those serve my business needs? Well, now it's being flipped again. It's like, how do I wait a minute, what do my customers expect from me? And what are their expectations? And then now my workforce, where before, I don't know that you necessarily spent, maybe you serve pizza to them on a regular basis, or maybe you put a game room in your facility, but you weren't really thinking about, how do I empower my agents to drive up their experience? What should be my transactional handling strategies to take advantage of the limited labor that I have that's expensive? And what should that look like? What should go to self-service? What processes can we simplify or automate to make our agents more effective? What tools can we give them to help them service customers, where that kind of CX and agent experience stuff comes together? And so I think there's a lot. And then what insights can I glean from those calls, and how do I apply them and work them through my organization? Right? I think that's the stuff we're working on with clients on right now. It's like, I can adopt AI technology to evaluate calls all day long. You can do it. It's out there. There's lots of good partners. We work with all of them, right? But if you can't move that information through your organization to affect change in agent behaviors, client response, those types of things, I don't want to say you've wasted your money, but you're not going to get everything out of it that you hope for at the end of the day. And I think that's what clients are kind of wrapping their head around right now. It's like, okay, wait a minute. I'm supposed to get this. How do I get it at the end of the day? So
I think it goes back a little bit to what you talked about earlier in the conversation, which is prioritization, right? It's figuring out what the priority is for your business and what's going to be, either the most impactful or hold the most weight for you. And I know that like you said, there's so many, I guess, routes you can go. I've talked about that a little bit with some other guests too, but there's so many things out there so many roads, I guess, you can go down. And
sure.
One road may lead into another road, or it may just take you down, one path on its own. But, sometimes I feel like contact center leaders get into the situation where there's just so many competing priorities that they do what a lot of us do when we get overwhelmed and just do nothing. And so that's obviously a worst case scenario, right? You're just doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result, which I think, I forget who said that, but that's, the definition of insanity is the famous quote there. We're doing the same thing and expecting a different result. And so to prevent getting yourself into that situation, how do you think about what to prioritize? And how do you start making sure that you're getting some positive momentum behind making change?
Well, when we take a look, it's a great question. When we take a look at organizations and when they ask us to come in and to do an assessment or take a look at things, we give them 2 perspectives. One is, how are you set up to achieve your business objectives, right? So that's like kind of like filter number 1. And so, we spend a lot of time working with them on, hey, what are you trying to accomplish, right? At the end of the day, and why? How important is it to you? What are the impacts of those accomplishments to your organization? But also, what's the rest of the industry doing? What could you be doing or should you be doing? And that's really important in 2 places. One is, in many cases, I don't, where I worked at before, I used to say all the time, hey, our poor performance is baked into the budget, right? So I don't have to improve necessarily because our poor performance is baked into plan. I just have to achieve my plan at the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
And so how do I stretch beyond that and give them that perspective saying, hey, this is what other organizations in similar circumstances are doing, and these are the results they're achieving by doing these things. Here's the level of effort necessary to achieve that, and here's what you get. Here's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. At the end of the day, here's why you do it, right? And so I used to work for a guy who used to talk about the vital few, and what he meant by that was, we got 150%, 200% of things you could do. what are the things, but you have 100% of capacity to get things done. And one of the most meaningful things you can do, and one of the most important lessons any contact center leader has to learn is you've got all these voices coming at you. COOs, CFOs, CTOs, all these C's and O's coming at you with different, do this and what about this? And it's like, okay, well, what are the most impactful things overall that are going to drive? So what's most important, what should be most important, and what's going to drive your business? And so we prioritize based on impact and complexity. It's a cliche, but it's right. You want to, what are the least complex, highest impact things you can work on? And those are the things you should go work on first. And it's really understanding those things that really makes it powerful at the end of the day. And I think so many times, and I was a contact center leader. I've only been in consulting for about 5 years now. I came out of the contact center industry. Sometimes I used to tell people, hey, I walk out of my office and everywhere I look, I see a problem, right? Which probably makes me a great consultant at the end of the day, but it can become overwhelming sometimes. And it's like, okay, what are the most important things I could be working on? I used to have to schedule time in my calendar to go to the bathroom so that I could, because it got that crazy. And so it's really helping them cut through that clutter and saying, hey, here are the most important things. These are the most important things to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And here's the most important things based on what the trends are in the industry. And this is what you get when you accomplish them. Here's how hard it's going to be, and here's what you get at the end of the day. And that is a message that resonates across organizations. Usually when you get up to talking to COOs and CEOs and CTOs, those are messages that typically resonate across organizations. So you can cut through all that.
Yeah, that's effective. And, prioritizing it, identifying, the change is one part of it. And then if you think about, okay, look, I've figured it out. I know what we have to do. The next thing, especially that some of those C and O's are going to, want to know is, well, great. We decide to do all of this. That's fine. We can figure it out. But, you as our contact center, as our customer experience leader, have a responsibility to make sure that we see this through and that it's doing all the things it says it does. How are you going to do that? And that's where I find sometimes people go, oh, good question. I don't know how I'm going to do that. Is there sort of I guess maybe not even an easy way, but an effective way to just measure and continue to optimize and build on those changes? In a perfect world, everything always works out and it works perfectly and gets exactly the result you want, and you move on to the next thing or coast. But as we know, that's, businesses change and goals change. And, I guess how do you factor in, kind of that ongoing optimization piece and just making sure you're constantly innovating?
If you don't measure it, you can't manage it at the end of the day. And that's ultimately what you have to do. And I would say that most contact centers, at least that I've worked in, when I was a contact center operations leader, whenever we did something new, we'd hire some consultant or bring in new technology and there was impacts projected as a result of that. Typically, those things are put into my budget or put into my objectives or both. So I was constantly measuring with the impact, right? And sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't, but I was on the hook for it. So usually when we work with clients, it was like, okay, who's going to effectively own these things at the end of the day? When we leave, right, when we get done with our work, who's going to own delivery of these objectives? And so you have to have an identified leader. And the second thing you have to have is, okay, how are you going to measure these things? So if I'm putting in a self-service automation process and saying, look, you can automate this process, and we say, well, you should be able to self-service X percentage of your interactions through this deal, then we need to leave them with a way to measure that. And then, we'll check back in with them on a regular basis to make sure that they're achieving those objectives. Or, if it's one of our current clients, if they're with one of our strategic account managers or with our CSMs, they're checking back in with them too, saying, hey, look, how's your call containment, or, hey, we said we're going to do this process simplification and it should cut out, 30 seconds of handle. Where are you at? Where's your overall handle? What's working? What's not working? Right. And then you can come back in and fine tune later. And that's the only way it's going to happen. So many times everybody walks away and then it either happens or it doesn't happen. And if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And if you're not constantly working to make sure you're getting it, because at the end of the day, like going back to what we talked about before, people talking to people, there's a lot of unknowns. So and when things don't work out right, why isn't it working out right? What has changed from our original assumptions, and identifying that and saying, okay, how do I tighten this screw or loosen this nut to get what we wanted to get out of it? And that's ultimately what you're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of the next shining red ball, right? As I've talked about that a little bit before on this podcast, but what I mean by that is there's always the new cool thing in this space that you can go do or that you want to evaluate, or the new buzzword. And I think it's really easy to lose sight of, your end goal and what results you're trying to get for your business. And, curious, John, if you've seen that, and if so, what are maybe some important factors to just keep an eye on, or maybe keep on top of mind when you are going through some sort of evaluation, whether that's tech or whether that's looking at a process, specific to your environment?
Well, I think it starts with the simple question. I've asked it a lot of times. What are we trying to accomplish here? At the end of the day, we're making a change. So be intentional about the changes you're doing and why you're doing it. It's easy. There's a ton of stuff. It is, to your point earlier, it's a rapidly evolving industry. There's new technologies being deployed. There's Genesis and 5.9 and ICX1 are in constant evolution of their platforms and bringing out all this new cool stuff, right? All of which is great. All of which delivers on it's all real, right? All that stuff is real. And so really, but being intentional about, what are we trying to accomplish and where are we relative to being able to capitalize on that? So focusing on that. One of the first consulting engagements I got into with a client we've been working with now for 4 years. And when we were engaged, the starting point of the engagement with the business leader who engaged us was, John, I need you to come in here and you need to build the business case to migrate from our Cisco technology to the cloud. We need to be on the cloud. I have all these things I want to do, right? And I can't do them in the Cisco environment. Not to pick on Cisco. So we went in and we looked at it, and we really realized really quickly that while they needed to do that, they had a lot of other problems they had to solve. And if they didn't solve those problems first, like process problems, they were never going to get the gain out of it that we wanted. And so I had to go back to our client and say, look, that's a problem, but that's not your biggest problem. This is your biggest problem. And based on what you told me that you were trying to accomplish, here's where you are and here's where you want to go. And you can't get there without changing these things first. And so we spent 3 years basically reimagining their contact center, re-engineering their contact center, everything ground up. And now we're helping them to migrate to new technology. And when they deploy that, they're going to get everything out of it they wanted to, because their process is aligned and their organization has basically adopted these things to put them in a position to where the technology is the last thing now to bring it over the line, bring it over the finish line. So, I would say that takes discipline, right? That takes discipline and focus, right? And I credit them for having the courage to sit. It was a hard message to deliver, to sit across the desk from a guy that hired you, that gave you money, gave you a job to do, and say, hey, that's not the job you really want us to do. This is the job you want us to do. Yeah. And so it was a fun conversation. So
I bet, but it obviously paid off, and I think that's really that says a lot, because I think being in this space, I guess maybe I don't really know. I guess maybe the most lucrative or maybe the most impactful thing to an organization is, we'll definitely sell you a new CCaaS platform, sure. Right? And absolutely, we will. But to your point, taking a step back and going, look, we can do that for you, absolutely. But I just want to make sure that that's actually what you need, because what's going to happen if that's not really what you need is you're going to go through this huge transformation. We're going to go through, this evaluation. You're going to train all your users. And then 6 months after we deploy, you're going to be right back where you were, or maybe even in the worst case now, because we spent all this money.
let's be clear. They were maybe one of the most broken contact centers I'd ever been involved. I mean, we'd need a whole other podcast to just go through the case study for this client in terms of how broken they were. So I don't think that they're representative of the world. And I know one of the things we do is like we're working. We have a great technology consulting. You guys have talked to us. You've had Stanton Smith on the podcast. You've had Adam on the podcast. We have a fantastic tech consulting team that does a fantastic job of lining up clients, gathering their requirements to make them be successful as they adopt new technology. They do a wonderful job. What we're working with them on now is saying, hey, look, through this process, as you see these new capabilities that the clients are going to adopt, we identify processes where maybe they're not quite ready, either from an alignment standpoint, from a workforce alignment standpoint, or process alignment, to realize the full benefit of the technology. Right. And so now we can basically do both. And you can do it. You can fly both those planes at the same time, or one right after another, to the point where it doesn't necessarily slow you down so much that, it's like, okay, great, we're going to put off a technology, engagement for 4 years now while we fix everything. It's not that. It's like, hey, we can do these things pretty quickly to go in and say, hey, you're going to move from traditional quality to AI-driven quality. How are you going to move that? You're going to have all this information now. How are you going to move that information through your organization? Is your your performance management function strong enough to take full advantage of all this information? We can make some tweaks to that to put you in a position to get the maximum benefit, the big bang out of this thing that you really hope to get when you adopted this new technology or acquired this new capability. So
yeah, and that's sort of a perfect world, right? You need to make a change from a technology perspective. You know that you want it done right. So it's almost hey, while we're doing this evaluation, let's maybe dig into some of this. That way, when we've selected, the new technology that we think is going to be, our the one that we adopt for our business for long term, we've already worked out all those kinks beforehand. And so when we go to implement that solution, we know that, look, we have crossed T's, we've dotted I's, we've even put the little dash on all the sevens, right? I mean, at this point, we know this is going to be perfect, or we have a high, can have a high confidence in this solution, because we've not only evaluated the tech, but we've looked at our entire operation, and we've made adjustments where we need to make operationally, and we've also got the best tech to support some of those adjustments.
Right. And I think that's what we're seeing clients look at now. They're realizing that technology, while it's powerful and it's loaded with capability that's going to drive performance through the organization, if it's not aligned with process and it's not aligned with people, that whole people, process, and technology is a cliche, but it's true. I mean, I think it was Accenture that came up with it. I think they got it right. That's one of the things they got right. So, and it's all that has to be aligned to your business objectives in order to get what you want to get out of it. And that's ultimately, I think, what you're saying. I mean, I used to joke with one of the CEOs of one of the leading CCaaS providers, like, hey, look, we make a great living cleaning up after you guys. And that was what we did, because we would be like, hey, let's just take what we're doing now, let's just deploy it in this new technology. And then clients 6 months later would be like, wait a minute, I thought I was going to get this, or I thought I was going to get that. And then we would come in behind it and fix it after the fact. It's just easier to fix it up front, get it right up front, and design it right up front. Saves you
headaches and saves you stress for sure.
Right, for sure, and then it becomes and it's a win when you go live. It's a win. So, yeah,
that's great, John. One of the last things I always like to ask people as we're wrapping up here, because believe it or not, we're almost at 30 minutes. You work with a lot of customers in the space, and you have worked in this space in general for, like, I think you said over 30 years. Although you don't look a day over 24, maybe. So.
No, I don't wear hip shoes like you do, so I'm not,
Yeah, but John, there's a lot going on. We've talked about self-service, we've talked about automation, we've talked about a ton of things and we've even talked about, it flipping from, hey, what's right for our business and how do we get the most out of our business, to, wait, what do our customers want? So there's a lot of emerging trends today that are already here, right? Or we're already in the middle of them. But, what do you think that'll mean over the next 1 to 5 years? Do you see more of the same, just more focus on what we're looking at today? Do you see anything that's maybe just on the horizon that some of these things will lead into being the biggest driver for contact centers in the near future?
Well, it's, there's an underlying trend related to labor that's not going to go away, right?
Yeah.
That's a big issue. And there's lots of different solutions to that issue. But what I think the one that excites me the most is the possibilities that come through AI. And that's kind of AI is one of those buzzwords we talked about. It means a lot of different things, but there's a lot of possibility with regard to, what virtual assistant technology, IVA, so creating a human-like interaction that people will want to, that customers will want to interact with to simplify process, to give them faster service delivery. There's a whole host of things happening from a tool standpoint to empower agents, like agent assist, notes automation, process simplification through AI, and then there's this whole world of business insights that's being driven on the backside. So to me, that's the thing that really excites me is, hey, look, we're going to have all this information at our fingertips to really drive, a great customer experience, to drive a great agent experience. And when you have those two things, those two things fit together, like a hand in a glove, that you can't have a great customer experience without a great agent experience at the end of the day. Yeah. And then, couple that with a strategy, an interaction strategy of saying, okay, what goes to where, what are the right resources to basically take care of all these different things that we're trying to get done here, that is the best for us, but also more importantly, best for our customers, right at the end of the day. And to me, that's the new frontier. It's here, it's evolving right now, right in front of us, and I think it's really exciting. So
great. John, that was very insightful and a lot of really good takeaways from this episode. I really appreciate the conversation.
No, I do too. It's fun. Look at it. This is weird, but this is the kind of stuff I like talking about. It's been the biggest chunk of my adult life, half of my adult life I've spent doing this. So it's super interesting. And anytime you want to talk, Austin, I'm happy to do it. So
great. Well, I may take you up on that. I don't know if we have our next guest slated just yet, so we may get a back-to-back John episode. Who knows? We'll see.
We'll see. We'll see how many people are actually interested in it. But I am. I definitely am. So yeah, I really appreciate it, Austin. Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, John.
Hi.